Hello, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this edition of This Week with the Communist Party. My name is Joe Sims, and we're so happy that everybody was able to join us this evening. We have a great program for you tonight. As you know, the subject is the recently concluded meeting in Athens, Greece, of the World Communist and Workers movement. There were dozens of communist parties there from all over the world, very involved in struggles of the working class and people. And we're going to hear a lot more about that in just a second. Before I introduce the panel tonight, I want to remind you that tomorrow morning at 10:30, both on YouTube and on Facebook, we'll have the regular Friday edition of This Week with the Communist Party. And then on Sunday evening, the Education Department of the party is presenting a webinar on, check this out, Zombies, Jedi, and Fighting Fascism. Zombies, Jedi, and Fighting Fascism. That's going to be at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 Central, and 5 o'clock Pacific. And the panel will be Chauncey Robinson, who is the social media and culture editor of People's World, and Michelle Kern, who is a film and culture critic living in the Bay Area of California. Well, so we think you're going to find that really interesting. Tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing one of two comrades who was at the conference in Athens. Unfortunately, Rossana Cambron, who led our delegation, got sick today and is unable to join us. So we want to send good, positive wishes to Rossana. Rossana, we hope you get better real soon, like tomorrow. We need you. But we do have Chris Butters, who is the chairman of the Brooklyn Club of the Communist Party, and a long time and good and old friend and comrade of mine. Chris is a member of the state committee of the Communist Party here in New York City and New York State. And he's also a damn good poet. So, Chris, why don't you give us a snapshot of what happened at the Athens conference, and then we can take some questions and answers. And everybody, if you want to ask a question, you can put it in the chat box, and we can have a little bit of back and forth. So without further ado, take it away, Chris.
Thanks, Joe. And we'll miss Rossana here, but I'll do my best here to represent. I was proud to be another delegate to the 20th annual International Meeting of Communist and Workers' Parties held in Athens, Greece. As probably many of you know, this is a gathering of communist parties that's been going on since 1998, initiated by the Greek Communist Party. Every year they meet in a different city. This year we met in Athens, Greece, in the wonderful Greek Communist Party headquarters, filled with mementos of the struggle of the Greek people against military junta, the Greek Civil War, the partisan struggle against the fascists in World War II. The theme this year was the theme of alliances in the struggle, social alliances in the struggle against capitalist exploitation, endless war, inequality. There were, I believe, something like 93 representative delegates there, representing about 73 communist parties. There's a wide variety of communist parties there. Some were actually coming from a place where they were outlawed by right-wing regimes in the former USSR, where the hammer and sickle has been banned, for instance. Others have majority in their legislature and run the government, like in Nepal. Others are smaller communist parties. Some, like the Portuguese Communist Party and the South African Communist Party, have deep, deep roots and history in the working class. So there was a great variety of communist parties. The mood was one of rebuilding. As Rossana says in the article that is up on the CPUSA.org website, there was a feeling of the Communist Party getting a second wind, recovering from, of course, the major setback in the overturn of the Soviet Union, as the Greek representative from the CP who opened the conference said, "We have proven them wrong," referring to the end of history ideologues that thought that capitalism was here to stay, socialism was not viable, and there's that acronym TINA, which was used to inaugurate the European Union. TINA stands for there is no alternative, and we were here to show there is an alternative. Socialism is alive, and on the 100th year after the Russian Revolution, etc., the motto still is "Workers of the World Unite." I would say that if I had to summarize the themes of the conference, one was the role of U.S. imperialism and NATO as the #1 threats to peace around the world, whether in the Middle East, Latin America, Asia, Africa. #2 was the role of the European Union, both as a pillar of U.S. imperialism and as an imperialist rival. And its impact on all the European countries, including the CPs that are organized against the cutbacks. 3, the alarming growth of far-right and fascist groups, including some in the government, and how to organize them. And of course, that was paved the way by neoliberal policies that many CP parties pointed out. And finally, solidarity with Cuba, with Venezuela, with Korea, etc., and defend the CPs of the world under attack from many of their own governments at this point. I could go through in alphabetical order all the presentations that were made. It was in alphabetical order, but I would say another way to organize it was by regions of the world. One was the countries, Russia, Poland, Hungary, Kazakhstan, etc., Kazakhstan, who documented what life is like after the overturn of the Soviet Union, the devastating deindustrialization, austerity measures, use of their countries or military bases for NATO, etc. A high point was the report by the Russian CP, but you can read that on solidnet.org. There were the countries from Europe where U.S. imperialism is not the direct face of monopoly capital, but the European Union is, and it's a political and economic union of monopoly capital, of especially the French and German bankers, that is driving everyone down to the bottom, recognizing only the sovereignty of capital to move across borders, but not working people, and leading to more neoliberal policies. And one of the high points there were, for instance, Britain CPs, Irish CPs, calling for a people's Brexit. We know a week after this conference, there was the big vote by UK around Brexit, which is still ongoing. Many parties, Netherlands, Germany, Belgium, and others are forming regional networks to fight the EU. And of course, maybe, Joe, we could talk more about the yellow vest movement going on now, only 2 weeks later after the international conference in France, which is directly connected to what the issues we talked about, directly connected to what was going on in Greece under the EU with the memorandums there, etc. In the Americas, of course, U.S. imperialism is the direct face of it. We know what it's like to live in the U.S. We don't have to go into that. U.S. would like nothing more than to turn Russia, as Russian CP said, into another semi-colony the way it was before the Soviet Union. And the U.S. would like nothing more than to turn Cuba and Venezuela back into colonies of Yankee imperialism, you know, if they get their way. Another issue was the growth of far-right policies and fascism. I got to say, our report, ably given by Rossana, was, I thought, quite well received. There was a lot more mention about Europe and the European Union, but I think our report highlighted, again, you can read it on cpusa.org, the turn by imperialism towards war and fascism. In our case, it happened through elections. We highlighted our involvement in the elections to check Trump's fascistic power grab, and pointed to the need for united fronts along the lines of Dimitrov. I was happy to see the South African comrades in their excellent report also pointed to the need to address the rise of right-wing parties and fascism, and the South African Communist parties, as other parties pointed out, that this was preceded by the failure of neoliberalism since the 1980s and the failure of social democracy to offer an alternative, and that's what we're facing in France with the yellow vests. On the question of alliances, how am I doing on time, Joe? Maybe give me a couple more minutes and then we can ask some questions. On the question of alliances, while there was much agreement, you could see within these different sectors about imperialism. The question of alliances, there were some differences. The Greek Communist Party spoke of the actuality of socialism in their presentation, and focused on the need to fight social democracy, but also, and to build on our own class struggle program, but also envisioned a direct road to socialism with no stops or stages. And this was contrasted to a number of other parties, including our own, I may say, that spoke of necessary stages in the struggle for the actuality of socialism, whether that would be united front against fascism, as called for by a number of parties, the fight against religious sectarianism, and fronts, electoral fronts there by the Iraqi CPs and I believe in India, fronts for peace, etc. To be fair, I guess the Greek Communist Party and others were, you could call, victims of a Euro-communist trend years ago, which had a negative impact on their parties and led to a failure to distinguish between the communist parties and social democracy in many cases. But again, reacting to that unfortunate development is not the same thing as a scientific assessment of a balanced assessment of the balance of forces, etc. To close, maybe I want to stop there. I just saw, as a new kid on the block, the first time going there, I saw how much we have in common with other parties, how we are all fighting the same forces: privatization, racism, the endless wars, of course, the endless wars administered by, most especially by our own powers that be, our own ruling class. I would say this happened. I would underscore the international meeting happened at the same time as a general strike. Actually happened 2 days after. I was still in Athens 2 days after a general strike called by the Greek KKE in Athens against the memorandums of the EU. It happened a week before the Brexit issue, the Brexit vote, and the British comrades are fighting within the labor movement to oppose membership in the EU and calling for a people's Brexit. And it happened, of course, 2 weeks before the Yellow Vest movement going on now in France, which is connected to all the issues we discussed. So there's much to talk about. Many things to talk about. So let's hear any questions you have, Joe, or our listeners.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
That was a really interesting presentation. I was wondering, we hear a lot, and we're very concerned in this country about the environment. Just this week, there were protests all across the country led by young people, high school and college students around the issue. Was it your sense that the international meeting, to what extent did different parties address that issue? Yes, was it part of the presentations or not so much?
There were great presentations. There were emphasis on imperialism's drive for natural resources, markets, pipelines, especially in the Middle East, in regard with the Ukraine, with Syria and the former USSR states. So indirectly that was mentioned. In terms of an environmental movement, not so much. That's not to say it wasn't mentioned in paragraphs in these 10-minute presentations.
Sure.
But if I'm not mistaken, it was not very pronounced in terms of not specifically mentioned in the resolutions which were passed. And okay. I think that might have been...
Let's take some questions from some of the comrades and friends who are viewing the program this evening. Again, if you want to ask a question, just put it in the group chat box and we'll be happy to share it. I already saw one about the Palestinian struggle and the BDS movement. Was there attention to Palestine, Chris, and the Israeli occupation of Palestine? And what did the parties in the region have to say? I know the Palestinian People's Party was there, and the Lebanese Party, and the Communist Party of Israel.
Right.
What do they think about the situation?
Right. Yes. Those parties were present. I believe the Syrian Communist Party was present. Jordan, Communist Party of Jordan. So most of the parties in the region were represented. Israel and Palestine has, I think, been a strong issue throughout. There was a resolution specifically passed at the end of the session condemning Israel's power grab, calling for removal of the settlements, denouncing Trump's so-called deal of the century behind the scenes, the new, I believe it's constitution that basically recognizing the apartheid state of Israel, refusing to recognize the nationality of Palestine. and calling for a Palestinian national state along the, as outlined in the 67 resolution, the June 67 resolution. There was some, there is a Palestine Communist Party, there's a Palestine People's Party, and there's an Communist Party of Israel. The Palestine Communist Party recently reported it changed its position to call for a one-state solution, but that was opposed by the majority, and the actual resolution called for the two-state along the borders of the 67 agreement, and
it's an important issue.
Yes, it is.
In the United States, and there's a lot of confusion about it, you know.
Right.
Comparisons to the segregation here in the United States, or the apartheid situation in South Africa, and it's not quite the same. So it's something that we need to dig into and think about a lot more.
And I would add also, it's very important to us because the resolutions and the discussions highlighted the role that Trump is playing with his access with Netanyahu and Saudi Arabia against the Palestinian people, as well as to realign the Middle East in the interests of oil, big oil, and U.S. imperialism and NATO.
Okay. We got another question about the participation of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. They want to know, one comrade wants to know, was Gennady Zhuganov there? And what did they have to say about the situation in Russia? Did you get a sense of that, Chris?
Well, he wasn't there. They had a delegate. They spoke, you know, in each report, the parties basically placed their report in terms of the world situation, which I found very helpful and educational in many cases, and then talked about what's going on in their own countries. And they highlighted their role in fighting against austerity measures, against pensioners, leading the fight against that.
That's interesting, because some people are of the impression that, you know, that the CP of Russia is supporting Putin. You didn't get that sense, huh?
You know, it's clear they defend Russia against NATO and U.S. imperialism.
But that's not the same thing as supporting Putin.
Ukraine, yeah, and that's a very important distinction. Yeah, it's clear to me that they are fighting against the austerity of Putin and organizing against the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer there. I also noticed in their previous, in the 19th international meeting, they actually spoke about the attacks on democratic rights by the government, meaning Putin. So they are fighting. I believe they're the second or third most votes. They get the second or third most votes in the election.
I think they're the second largest party in the Russian.
You know, and we've in People's World quoted polls that say that, you know, a majority of the people in the Soviet Union, ex-Soviet Union, look back favorably on many aspects of the USSR and are for socialism.
Did you and Rossana have a chance to have a face-to-face with the delegates?
Rossana had, I think, frankly, a little more success because she spoke Spanish. I got a great picture of her with the Bolivian comrade against the statue of Lenin in the Greek CP headquarters,
Right.
which Rossana had.
Huge statue of Lenin, right? It's about 20 feet.
Been there. Yeah, yeah.
Huge.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
Yeah.
What about China? We got a question about China. You mentioned that the Chinese party was there.
Right.
What kind of presentation did they give? And
right. Right. Very, that's a good question and very important because, as you know, we went to China. John Bechtel and someone from my own club, Carol Ramos, went to China. Some amazing things going on there. The Chinese spoke on the first day and spoke about their opening up policy in similar ways to, I think they spoke to us and was reported by John Bechtel in his articles. They spoke about ending poverty, releasing 800 million Chinese out of poverty in the last several decades, an amazing feat.
Wow.
I thought most significantly is this was the first year they were members of the working group. Now, the working group is a group of a smaller group of parties, maybe 20 or so, that organizes the conference. And Rossana and I both believe next time the party goes, maybe we should go a day earlier to take part in that meeting. And the Chinese spoke very favorably of the international meeting, its role in promoting a new kind of party-to-party relations. The quote is in the article in CPUSA.org. And this was important, Joe, in another way, because I've got to say, the Greek Communist Party in particular does not believe China is building socialism. They characterize it as a capitalist party. That's a disagreement.
Capitalist party or a capitalist country?
I'm sorry, capitalist country. Mm-hmm. I stand corrected. So it's all the more significant that China spoke and participates. And that was certainly not the only opinion characterization. Many welcomed the Chinese participation and recognized the accomplishments of China, its road to socialism, and the Chinese CP.
Big country, big party, playing a huge role in the world, and their participation in these international meetings has grown.
Right.
The last period, there was a certain distance in the past, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Sure. So now you spoke about the Yellow Vest movement. Was there a presentation at the conference from the French Communist Party, and did they talk about the demonstrations that are taking place in Paris and other parts of the country and what the reasons were?
I guess I'm going to have to pass on that. They weren't present at the conference. They did I think submitted a written presentation, which we quoted in the article, CPUSA.article. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. So I should say. Of course, the Yellow Vests demonstrations erupted only 2 weeks later, and they're quite clear that this is not an issue about global warming or ways to address global warming, but a whole accumulation of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer as part of the European Union program.
It's a revolt against austerity, right?
Austerity and the neglected, and it's basically a question of leadership now. Can the left intervene and bring it to socialist solutions and extend the struggle? You know, I read recently that a lot of the yellow vests are manufactured in Egypt, and Egypt has now stopped manufacturing the yellow vests because I guess somebody is afraid this is going to spread. I've read that in Belgium, for instance, people are wearing yellow vests. And who knows, maybe in Greece people will be wearing yellow vests, or maybe people in the US will be wearing yellow vests.
And then next thing you know, yellow will be the new red, right? Like,
yeah, or red vests, yeah. They are so, they seem powerful, but they're so few and we're so many. And the great thing about this conference is when you're there for 3 days, all the international issues and the connections become so much more real. So
you get a sense of the world movement as a whole.
Right.
And the diversity, but unity in that diversity of the different struggles and issues.
And people wrestling with how the international connections and yet remaining faithful to their own national situation. And that's the struggle, the dance, whatever.
Was there any discussion about the coordination of struggles? I mean, there are so many issues that you would think that we could find common ground to work on.
Yes.
Whether it was the environment, global warming, or immigration, or the export of jobs. Any talk about that? How to get together and coordinate?
Right. You know, you said in promoting this YouTube, you said, what do communist parties do when they get together? And I'd say when they get together, they want to intensify the struggle, and just being there together, I think, increased the desire to coordinate. So as I said before, some of the parties in Europe are already regionally coordinating against the European Union. Netherlands, Germany, Belgium, maybe Britain, I'm not sure. In Brazil, which I haven't even gone into, and I had a very interesting conversation with a comrade from Brazil who would like to be
talk about that a little bit, because you know the world communist movement is not just European.
Right.
In fact, the overwhelming weight of the world communist movement is in Asia and Latin America.
Right.
What do you say?
Right.
You're talking about Brazil. I'm sorry, but I just sparked my interest.
Well, I could go to the first question. Brazil, there are two communist parties in Brazil, and they are organizing a united front with other forces against the Bolsonaro regime, which is out to. There's already a bill. There's already talk of outlawing the communist parties in Brazil. So it's a need for fight back. It's a need for unity. It was again, to the next point you're talking about is the powerful role of the CPs in Latin America. So one of the high points of the conference was the Cuban CP report, speaking about their difficulties with the blockade. They spoke about their new constitution and etc. But they also took care, and I thought it was quite moving, to stand in solidarity with all their difficulties with Venezuela, with Bolivia, with Nicaragua, and that was quite moving. And that's a powerful. The CPs are fighting for a Latin America that stands for working people, as they are in Asia. We had a strong Indian Communist Party, Marxist that spoke. Bangladesh, Pakistan, quite.
Nepal
was representing Nepal. I don't know as much as I should about that, but recently united with I believe, a Maoist party, and has now basically won 2/3 of the legislature and is running the country, and I wanted to know more about that. But in terms of coordination, there were several resolutions passed, and there was an appeal passed, which we quoted in the CPUSA.org article around general lines of solidarizing against imperialist war, defend the history of the communist movement and the values of proletarian internationalism, internationalist solidarity for women's rights and emancipation, political and trade union freedom and democratic rights against fascist forces. Good to see that. Reactionary regimes, racism, and xenophobia. Again, the complete text of the written resolutions can be found on the solidnet.org website. But these are kind of general, and that is, a weakness. And there were resolutions on Palestine and defense of communist parties that are under attack in the former USSR, in Poland, in Kazakhstan, etc. But there was several parties expressed the aspiration, desire for closer coordination, marked by a higher level of unity, marked by respect for each other's party, honest expression of views with honest debate and leading to clarity, and the process will be ongoing. The Portuguese Communist Party, for instance, I said it very well. I think they said it very well. They said, we recognize there are still remaining differences between us, but for us, the major issue for us for greater unity is not the differences, but the process and commitment to the process of respect for each other's views, and each party having an equal weight in the discussions. And
well, that's a really important thing, because in order to have unity of action, it's important to have equality of participation, and a respect for the independence of each party in each country.
Right.
And the understanding that that there are no universal models of struggle, that each country has its own particular history and culture, and that the parties and the working people of each country know better than anybody else how to conduct it, and that kind of respect and equality of participation wasn't always there, and it may not be completely there now, and that's something that we are continually striving for. But one of the great things about these meetings is that it provides an opportunity for a rich exchange of experience, that we're talking together, that we're comparing notes, we're getting a better sense of what's happening, and that there's growth, and that there is, in fact, this second wind that the parties are breathing and laying the basis for, bigger and more important victories of the left and democratic movement in all of these countries. Take for example, the situation in France, great movement, but I heard some inklings that there were that the right wing, Le Pen and the neo-Nazis are trying to take advantage of it.
Sure.
In fact, I sent a note. I have a friend on Facebook who is in the French Communist Party, and I sent her a note. I said, "Solidarity, congratulations on the yellow vest." And she said, "Yes, but be careful, Joe, because the neo-Nazis and the racists are trying to take over that movement and use it for their own ends." And that's something that I didn't know, but we can also see in the United States, in a certain section of the working class, under the influence of a Trump. To talk a little bit about the United States, Chris, we got a couple questions about our policy. One comrade and friend wants to know, when are we going to start running candidates? What do you think about that, Chris?
I think we should. I think we should choose a. I'm hopeful that, for instance, at our convention, maybe we choose one race, and we throw everything we have into it. It would have to be something where we have roots with labor, with community organizations. This has been a discussion ongoing for a long time, but the opportunities are there. The interest is there. I know we have candidates running, projected to run
at the local level.
Yeah, to start with the local level.
It's really important. We have a two-party system in the United States, and that's really undemocratic and really unfair. And it creates a situation where sometimes, a lot of times, when you run as a third party, you stand the danger of being a spoiler and electing a Republican, a right-winger, and an anti-labor and racist, anti-environment kind of candidate. And you don't want to do that. We saw what happened with Gore and Bush and Florida several years ago. But on the other hand, we do need to develop independent working class politics and candidates. And the best opportunity to do that is at the local level, both within the Democratic Party and also, when possible, outside of the Communist Party, outside of the Democratic Party,
Right.
What we call an inside-outside strategy.
Right. And we've done it in the past. We can do it again. And
yes. We got another question about DSA. What is our attitude towards DSA? Do you guys work with DSA in Brooklyn, Chris?
We do. I was going to say to the last answer, if DSA can do it, we can do it. We have a different approach, but we've worked on their campaigns. We've been happy to work on their campaigns, Ocasio-Cortez, and also other campaigns where they didn't win earlier on that paved the way for that. And I think it's important for us to know as communists how to work with DSA, which got a big boost from the Bernie movement, which we were also in New York State and Brooklyn involved in deeply in the primary, and how to raise our own politics. And so that's very important. And to come back to the issue at hand about the international meeting, I saw with the Greek Communist Party, I could feel a little of the third period there, where the Social Democrats are the enemy. And
when you say the third period, you're talking about the period in the late 20s.
Yes.
The Soviet Union, where Zinoviev was the leader of the Comintern, the Communist International, and they developed a kind of sectarian policy which described social democrats as social fascists.
Right. And one of the biggest errors the communist movement made, which I am still embarrassed about, was that sectarianism in identifying.
Embarrassed about it.
Our slogan was "After Hitler, us," as if not recognizing the right danger. And I'm confident we'll not make that error again. But my point is to have a balanced sense of the right and the left, and working with building allies, just like this international meeting, the theme was, and building up our strength, knowing when to raise our politics, when to block with others, and that's so important. So yes, we do work with DSA. Some campaigns we oppose DSA. They didn't vote for. They didn't call for a vote against Trump in the general election, and stood out the general election because they didn't see any difference between Trump and
Clinton. There was a big difference.
Yeah.
On domestic policy. Oh my God.
But just if I could go back to, there were a number of anniversaries celebrated in this conference. Of course, the 100th anniversary last year of the Russian Revolution, the 200th anniversary of Marx, but also next March, I believe, is the 100th anniversary of the Comintern being formed. So this has been, the Comintern was formed in 1918 by Lenin out of the Russian Revolution and the fight against imperialism, based on the fact that the working class was an international class and needed an international program, and was a way for communist parties to work together. It was ended in, correct me, sometime in World War II,
right?
By basically by the USSR leadership, who had the biggest say in the Comintern, because they didn't see it met the needs of the world situation, and what they saw as what they needed to do to defend the Soviet Union through their own foreign policy. But what that did was it left a vacuum in terms of communist parties of the world being able to exchange views, coordinate, and be more effective if the workers of the world are going to unite. So I got to say, recognizing all the difficulties, Joe, you're saying, that was a kind of ghost in the room, as well as other things. And but there's still a distrust. I think parties don't want, there can't be an international that's homogeneous. There's got to be room for differing views. That's not to say the party in the country is automatically right and should be open to criticism. But again, wrestling with that whole question of the national specificities and an international program and what we all have in common.
Well, yeah, but my feeling is that the issue before us is not the formation of a new international, so much as the need for parties to coordinate their work on a regional and, where possible, international area where they have common programs that need to be addressed, and there's no reason why parties in, say, for example, in North America, Mexican, by the way, they were there, and the Canadian comrades were there.
Yes.
You guys got a chance to exchange with them.
Actually, Canadians gave, I thought, a quite good report, especially focusing on the environment and the fight against the pipelines and fracking. I must say that. So that was, I think, filled a hole in some of the reports.
Great.
Yeah, so we talk about stages. Maybe that's the stage. If there's ever going to be another international, the stage is going to be regional coordination and building up trust, and maybe there's going to have to be
you would think, you know, social
developments to
media
bring
now,
this together.
you know, you got Facebook, you got Twitter, and
They didn't have in 1918,
uh,
which they didn't have in 1918. Yeah,
no, yeah, they didn't have it, and but we have it now. And there's so many things that we could do together, even if it was an issue of sharing articles or sharing video or sharing photographs, you know.
right,
Um, you could just think about the ideological work that the parties could do to support each other.
right.
So many possibilities.
So
We have 10 more minutes before we end. We're ready to answer any other questions that you might want to put on the table. Recalling that in this meeting were representatives from Latin America, um, from Africa, from the Middle East, from Asia, and from Europe. The Vietnamese were there, Chris. You had a chance to talk to the Vietnamese.
yes, no, I didn't, but I wished I had, but I didn't. As a new kid on the block, so to speak, here, and maybe Rossana did.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Laos.
Laos was there, yes. Laos, Vietnam.
Big parties like the Indian CPM
Yes.
and the Communist Party of India were there. Did you get any sense of, from the self-critical, I mean, you have the rise of the right, countries like India, countries like Brazil, strong communist parties, you know, and any sense about what mistakes we might have made in organizing the working class and democratic struggle that could have prevented it? Did any sense of that put on the table at the meeting?
Yeah. There was, many of these parties have gone through many struggles. There were Euro-communist currents within them. Some underwent splits and realignments after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. So they've come a long way since then, and I think it's a second wind, a rebuilding. And I think many of them criticize some of their past practices in terms of not being a class pole in their own countries. But it was hard to say where they were, where their journey started and ended. Again, there were a number of parties there are a number of countries that had several parties. Example was Palestine. Brazil had two. In Russia, there were 4 or 5 different ones.
Right, you had the communist.
I can't begin to tell you it was hard to tell the differences in terms of what the reasons for separate existence was.
Which is why the struggle for unity is so important,
Right.
Because once there's a separation, it's really, really hard to get back together. Historically, in the communist movement, the biggest split came with the split between the Soviet Union and China.
Right.
And so in India, in Brazil, and a number of other countries, the party split in half. And
right.
One big party supporting the Soviet Union, the other big party supporting China, and never the twain shall meet. But more and more now in India and in Brazil, it looks like they're working together. Wouldn't you say? You got that impression?
I think so. Yeah. You would know more than me on that score, I think, given the history. But from what I could tell, yeah. if we're waiting for another question, I could go. A couple takeaways I took from this is,
yeah, let's try to wrap up.
I really appreciated after this more and more the work of Emil Scheppers and the International Department does for our party in terms of the international notes that appear, and that became much more real to me, and I really see the importance of that. All the parties spoke about the need to step up peace work and anti-war work. European Union is becoming militarized. The NATO already is, and there is over 1,000 bases around the world that the U.S. has, including in Latin America, in Europe, in Asia, and Africa.
1,000.
I believe 1,000. Yeah. And it was extraordinary how many are in the ex-USSR. I know we're going to be inviting some of these parties to our convention, Joe.
That's right, everybody. We're having our national convention next summer in Chicago. It's going to be our 100th birthday party.
Right. And I don't know who is going to come, but based on past conventions, that's always been gives another dimension to the discussion. So I think Rossana and I are in complete agreement. We should continue to go to these. Solidnet.org is a great resource, and for people who want to know more about what happened, please look at solidnet.org. I understand some of the presentations, which were in other languages, will be translated and put on the site soon. Emil tells me. And again, I just saw, you see all the connections around the world in all the sectors. And we have a great responsibility here because the stuff is coming down right here on from Wall Street and the Pentagon. And I didn't really highlight our report by Rossana, but again,
find it at CPUSA.org.
But it was well received. It was seen as coming from the trenches of the struggle. And so many countries are affected by Trump and are gaining hope from even what we can do in terms of the election.
That's an important point to make, because there's a view in certain sections of the left that our party is looked down on by the world communist movement, that we don't get no respect. You didn't get that sense.
Well, I mean, I felt we got respect from a wide swath of countries, and I think there's a recognition we are in the belly of the beast here, and we've got a history. Of course, we spoke in our report also about our fight against McCarthyism, the struggle with the fight with Angela Davis, and our proud history, and I think it was very important, our raising the struggle against Trump, which has influenced so many, whether it's Bolsonaro, the far right in Greece, Italy, France, Britain. So I think that was an important contribution.
Great. Well, thank you so much for participating, Chris. Chris went at the last minute. And stepping up and going to Athens. We really appreciate it. And thanks for coming this evening and sharing your impressions about what happened at the conference. Again, I want to remind you that you can find our speech and an article about the conference on our website at cpusa.org. If you want to join the Communist Party, we invite you to join. We need you. We need your contribution. We need your thinking. We need your activity. It's going to take a bigger and a bolder and better Communist Party and Marxist left and socialist left and working class left to fight these fascists We can't do it by ourselves. We need your support and participation. Tomorrow morning at 10:30 Eastern on Facebook Live and here on YouTube, we're going to have another edition of This Week at the Communist Party. We're going to be talking about a new book on sustainability and the environment, written by our own Mark Brodeen. And then again, once again, I want to remind you that on Sunday, the Education Department is presenting a webinar entitled Zombies, Jedi, and the Fight Against Fascism. That's Sunday at 8 o'clock. And you can find a link to it on the front page of our website at cpusa.org and also on Facebook. That does it for our discussion tonight. Thank you so much again, Chris, and we'll see everybody in the morning. Take care and good night.
Thank you.
All right, guys. See you on the picket line.
Bye.
Take care.